Well, it is 10:01, so let's begin. Uh, Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for making the time to join us today. My name is Kate Modick, and I'm going to be with my wonderful colleague today, Peter Barry, working with you and speaking with you about using the Hogan 360 to elevate collective performance. Uh, so I'll introduce PBC. We were founded 30 years ago by Peter Barry himself. We are a global leadership advisory firm, and we specialize in a range of psychometric assessments that we use to really deliver the best insights around human behavior at work. And we specialize in evidence-based tools, research, consulting, and coaching to ultimately help organizations improve their engagement and performance. Now, this organization was founded by the man who's joining me here today, Mr. Peter Barry himself. Peter Barry is our founder and managing director, and he has over 30 years' experience working with teams and individuals to improve their performance and achieve greater organizational results through coaching, diagnostics, strategy, and teamwork. Peter, would you like to say hi to our group?
Yes, thank you so much for giving up your valuable time. We've had a lot of expressions of interest in people participating today. And Kate, fabulous working with you. I love all your knowledge and wisdom and energy on the subject.
Likewise, Peter. Well, I did learn from the best. So I mentioned that Peter is our founder. He's also the inventor and publisher of the Hogan 360 and has also written quite a few white papers putting all of that knowledge and science into documentation for other people to be able to learn from. So Peter's got about 3 decades under his belt of understanding personality, teams, 360. And we've done our best today to consolidate and condense that knowledge together for you all and get to the crux of one of our more challenging issues around how do you use 360s, not just at the individual level, but for teams as well. So with that in mind, what we're going to go through today is we'll start by anchoring around what is PBC's approach to 360s, because this is something that does vary across different providers and consultancies in the market. We'll revisit why our team's so important as a unit for development, uh, and we'll give you some real examples around teams that we have actually worked with at PBC and how using tools like multi-raters has improved their team performance. We'll move into some very actionable tips around how you can use 360s in your facilitation practice. And of course, we will leave time for your questions. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat, but we will have time at the end of the call to go through and address those as they come through. So strap in, everyone. It's going to be a very high energy session, but we're really excited to talk about this topic. It's one that's very close to both of our hearts. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about PBC's approach to 360s and our philosophy around that. Peter, we've seen this triangle before. Can you talk to the audience who hasn't seen it about what this means for you?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Kate. So to keep it simple, we have this little model on the screen, and the concept is that leadership drives engagement and engagement drives performance. So all of the research we've seen, printed by Harvard Business Review, printed by Gallup, who conduct a lot of engagement surveys, the impact of the leader is the most consequential on the team, and the team then drives the employee experience. So getting the right leaders, the IQ, the EQ, working in the business, working on the business, but being inspiring, passionate, motivated around the purpose and the vision, has got to then translate down to the employee experience where they understand the purpose, they're motivated by it, and they enjoy their work and they enjoy their team. So at the moment, there are a lot of leaders who are underperforming with negative impacts on teams. Uh, CEO turnover is significant, and we've recently seen research that 40% of managers leading people don't want to be in a role of leading people. So we're getting some really shocking decisions in the leadership space. In terms of engagement, 2/3 of people are engaged, 1/3 are disengaged. They're thinking of quitting the boss or the job, and it has an effect on productivity, sales, customer service. So this little model really does underline our philosophy. So improving leadership should be tied to improving engagement and retention and performance, and then we want your bottom line results. So we think an
Mhm.
investment in leadership like 360s is an investment in getting better business outcomes.
Absolutely. And I think often when we talk about leadership, we approach it as the individual, but we realize that the team has a disproportionate effect on that engagement piece. So today we'll be looking at that in-between space that sometimes gets overlooked. What about this quote, Peter? Can you talk to us a little bit about this philosophy?
Yes, I can, Kate. We think the starting point for a leader at any level of an organization, you could be a first-time people leader or a CEO, is to understand that people have a brand. Brand is your reputation. It's what your colleagues think about your performance and your behavior at work. And I think your brand is your most valuable asset because it's the key to getting along and getting ahead. And we talk about self mastery. The journey starts with self awareness. Aristotle once said all wisdom starts with self awareness. So we love to use Hogan personality, Hogan 360 to begin that journey around self awareness. Next is self management. You've got a development plan, you've had some coaching, there's deliberate practice, you're building new mental muscle, you're building new habits and competencies. And the goal is self mastery. I'm now in charge of good and bad habits, good and bad competencies. I've got acute self awareness and strong discipline. And if you do all of that, you can guarantee career success. So it pays. Being self aware, self moderating really does have an impact on one's career. And if you're not doing this, Kate, you could be derailing. You could be
Mm.
lacking self awareness. You could be having negative impacts on people. I coached one manager recently who wasn't listening, and he said, "So what?" And the 360 was full of listen more, stop talking over people, stop trying to be the smartest person in the room. And he actually said to me, "Well, what if I'm not motivated to improve?" I said, "Well, when we
Fair enough.
repeat the 360 in 12 months, you're going to get the same data. And it'll be even worse next time because people will say you don't listen to your 360. And that's the issue,
Mm.
listening."
Yeah. And I don't know about you, Peter, but I find when people find out what we do for work, the biggest complaint I get is, this is going on with my boss or my colleague, and they're just not self-aware. They don't have that understanding of how they're coming across to others.
Yep,
And a lot of people feel like they don't even have an avenue to bring that up.
yep.
So at least your guy is aware, even if he's not concerned. Um, but I think that's a really good point in terms of PBC's approach is very much to use evidence-based tools to be able to capture that personal brand and give that person empirical data to help them understand themselves in a different lens. I say that because we've seen a big evolution in how 360s have come to the market and changed over time. And it's important to understand that, the 360s that we're working with today are not the same as the tools that started out in, say, the early 1990s. So at that time, when 360s first came onto the market, there was a big concentration on building that individual self-awareness and looking at gaps, but we weren't really doing very much with those tools, that instruments, we weren't sharing the feedback. It was often kept to that person individually, and it wasn't really standardized in terms of the approach. Now, in the late 1990s, we moved into more of the precursors for assessments we see today, which are much more structured. They have more value around reliability. Facilitators are trained on how to give that feedback. But again, that feedback was still kind of being left in a corner on its own and not actually being used for strategic purposes. Now, in the early 2000s is when we started to make the investment to align those instruments more with organizational goals. How do we integrate the results from 360s into things like succession planning and leadership development? So, opening that door to start to make it safer to share and use 360 data for other purposes. But that really brings us to the present world today, where a lot of systems are really reliant on that data, where there's so much that you can do from an organizational perspective with that 360 side, while at the same time, obviously maintaining confidentiality, ethics, respecting diversity. So for us at PBC, we try to tread that line nicely of using that strategic data in a way that's going to be meaningful for the organization, while at the same time doing something that's going to be safe psychologically and useful for that individual or that team. So I set all of this up so that as we start to talk about how we're using the 360s in teams, we can all accept this idea that 360s can be used in teams in a way that's not so volatile or violates someone's individual privacy. But it's all about how we approach that exercise. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Shall we? Okay. So just a quick overview in terms of the Hogan 360 as we've designed it to be able to accomplish those things. So first and foremost, to Peter's point around self-mastery and a leader's brand being their most important asset, our first goal is to really accurately be able to measure a leader's reputation with the 360. And we're very proud of the technical properties, the reliability and validity that's captured in our technical manual, which you're all welcome to view if you're interested. Um, Aside from the accuracy of the model, it's also incredibly important that we're building the leader's knowledge. So the Hogan 360 is designed with a universal leadership model, but at the end of the day, the entire tool is designed to help increase that person's awareness of what does it mean to be a comprehensive leader. We don't assume that just because someone is senior in their role that they've ever really thought deeply about what leadership or leadership behaviors mean to them. Now, none of this happens in isolation. We also think it's incredibly important that a leader can contextualize their scores by comparing it to their peers, whether that's in their industry or their geography or that role level, so that they actually understand that score in a meaningful way relative to others and understanding what's unique to them and how they perform compared to their peers. And lastly, but very much not least, is we want to make sure that that leader comes out with a very clear picture of their development opportunities. They've got clearly prioritized strengths and areas to improve upon. And at the end of the day, they have actionable feedback that they can use to take forward and hopefully score better on their next 360, although that's ultimately up to motivation. So that's a bit around how the Hogan 360 is designed. The other component to understand within that is what does this universal model look like? So here you can see this is our kind of our crown jewel in the 360 space in terms of how we look at leadership. This is based on a robust literature review of different leadership behaviors, accountabilities, and models. And as you'll see as we go through some of these case studies, that this model does work in a variety of different contexts. We compare the individual's perspective of themselves to their managers, peers, direct reports, external stakeholders as they decide. And as I mentioned, we make sure to benchmark that score so that they're really understanding exactly how that score came to be, how they compare to others. And of course, we work quite hard to make sure that that feedback stays anonymous and protects the importance of the exercise.
Kate, can I
Peter, this
jump in
is,
and make a couple of comments, if that's all right?
please
The
go
model
for it.
on the left was meant to be a generic global model that would work for the public sector and the private sector. And I did it with Dr. Robert Hogan about 18 years ago. And the top half, self-management and relationship management, are essentially your emotional intelligence scores. How do you get along? And down the bottom are what we call the harder competencies, uh, working in the business and working on. So the top half is measuring behavioral skills, and down the bottom, business skills. And the scoring on the left, on the right-hand side there, Kate, we think this makes our 360 stand tall compared to others. Each individual gets a score, and so you know exactly where you are in the scheme of things. And we do the same with teams, and we'll talk about a couple of case studies shortly, where we show you the team gets a score. Now, a lot of 360s don't give you scores at the macro level. We do. And we are actually working with some clients at the moment whose goal is to move from 5.7 to 5.9. Why don't we want to push leadership to be role models and gold standard? And then we tie that to, or what's the employee engagement data showing? And are we all achieving our KPIs?
Really well said, Peter. Especially that overall score is really the anchor to all of it, is having a number, being able to look at these competencies and see scores on them and actually quantify it. And as we get into the case studies, a lot of them come from a very hard science background, where having that data and that objective points is really meaningful to getting that buy-in from leaders who don't otherwise necessarily think about leadership or care about it in the way we might. Um, so the results from that, we have actually quite a few numbers we're proud of. In addition to your one overall score, um, we've actually grown from a humble tool to running 64,000 globally that have been completed. So when we say we've got benchmarking, we really do mean it. That means that we've got almost 700,000 people who have provided feedback on a Hogan 360. Hopefully, the people on the call might be in that number. We are very proud of our 7-point scale. We think it gives a lot of accuracy to the benchmarking. We've benchmarked over 30 countries. we're approaching 5,000 certified practitioners. I won't go through all of the numbers, but I will say we're quite proud of the level of flexibility that we offer as part of the tool. And we'll start to show you some examples of what that looks like today. So now that we've all become familiar with the Hogan 360, let's talk about 360s in the context of teams and why teams matter so much today. We'll start with a definition from Dr. Hogan himself, who tends to be our ultimate authority in these matters. So when we're talking about teams, we generally define them as three or more people who work towards a common goal. Performance is interdependent. They share common leadership and a common fate that depends on the performance of the team. And importantly, those who see themselves as being part of a team with a common goal and shared fate. So we say that because as you'll see the teams today, they're all different sizes, different interdependencies, but they fit that definition of importance. So, Peter, can you talk to us about the state of teams today?
Yes, absolutely, Kate. Thank you. A couple of quick statistics which you'll see in these slides. Recent research published by Harvard Business Review, 80% of teams are underperforming. Some are dysfunctional, which is absolutely horrible. Uh, and Bain and Company have published research that high-performing teams deliver bottom-line outcomes, including profitability, growth, shareholder return. So in other words, investing in building high-performing teams pays. It's a no-brainer. Even a CFO should be able to work that out if you can see the data. So we often go into a CEO and say, tell us your problems about teams. And they say, well, how do you know? And we know because 80% of teams have got issues. So move on to the next slide, Kate. And this is the one that says from the Center for Creative Leadership in Carolina, only 20% felt their team was high performing. So I think teams has been neglected. We often send individuals on a leadership program, or we send a cohort across different functions to participate in some seminars and learning, but we don't spend a lot of money and time taking intact teams. And yet the team is the unit of performance. The team is where we work together every day. And I have a quote, Kate, leadership is about results. Teams deliver results, judge the leader by their team, which is this particular quote here. So our research shows from Shell, who were one of our clients for 8 years doing 360s, that there is a direct correlation between the effectiveness of the leader and the engagement of the team. And that engagement of the team then produces those bottom line results.
Mm. And we have a great white paper looking at some of those results and how that engagement showed up in bottom line performance that we're happy
Yep.
to share with any of you on the call.
Yep. And Kate, if I
Well
was
said,
doing
Peter.
if I was doing a strategic business plan for a client, not only would you have the balanced scorecard, financial, customer processes, but you'd have all teams must be high performing, measured annually, to really put the pressure on
Mm.
investing in leadership teams to enrich the employee experience and deliver the strategic goals.
Mm. Well, I think that's a really good segue to looking at some teams who are measuring that annually and what the results they've seen from it. All right. So in terms of the tools that we'll be speaking through today, there's two main multi-raters that we use in our practice at PBC. The Hogan 360, probably most of you are familiar with that at an individual level, if not from our briefing just earlier and or your own practices. Um, we use for teams, we can aggregate the scores from individual reports into a team report. So it's still based on that same standard Hogan 360. We're just looking at that data for the team overall instead of for the individuals. On the other hand, we have the high performing team assessment. This is still a multi-rater tool where we're asking multiple people to provide feedback on the behaviors. But in this case, the entity that we're providing feedback on is the team itself. So we're treating the team as its own separate entity, and we're looking at that team in terms of the team's performance, in terms of the team's culture, as you can see from the model here. And we're potentially asking for external or just looking at the team to rate themselves and quantify those scores in the same way. Anything you want to add, Peter?
No, I think it's great. The To be frank with everyone, measuring and improving leadership and team effectiveness is a big, big issue because it's so consequential and not many companies are doing it well. There are only three tools you can be looking at: personality assessment, multi-rater, and team. And we're very proud to be able to say we've got all three to offer our clients.
Mhm. All right, well, let's talk about it. We've been teasing these case studies, so let's get into it. So, the first one comes from a university in Australia. They are part of the group of 8 research universities, over 57,000 students, 7,500 staff, multiple campuses, research facilities, and really well regarded for their research globally. And as well as their extensive partnerships that they leverage to kind of broaden their impact beyond Australia. It's a very driven organization. Peter, do you want to speak a little bit about the Deputy Vice Chancellor's approach to leadership and what they were hoping to
Sure.
achieve?
Thank you, Kate. Look, I'm very excited about this case study because it's hot off the press. It's just been finished in the last couple of months. We had fantastic support from the Deputy Vice Chancellor. And she was awesome to work with, very committed to her people. And the HR partner was an excellent business partner, fully understood the concept of 360s, creating psychological safety, investing in coaching, and wanting to repeat the 360s down the track. So that does help enormously, Kate, if it's well sponsored from the start. So we're going to show you what happened with the group data here. There were 9 deans, different heads of faculty that were
Mhm.
measured.
But I guess before we jump into the data itself, we'll talk a little bit about, I guess, the why they chose to work with the Hogan 360.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
The
yeah.
HR lady knew a lot about the market, and she was insistent that they use a model that had validity. So we gave her the technical manual. She was impressed with the fact that everyone would get a score and the team would get a score. Chose an executive benchmark so they could be up against a pretty solid number. They loved our strengths and opportunities tables, which makes it really clear about what you can leverage and what you need to address. Custom options, they went for a custom options, Kate. So we sat down and designed a competency framework based on our extensive and valid library of items. And we ended up giving a lot of value for money. So it was a good approach and it was a good
Mm.
relationship of trust and partnering.
Yeah, I think this is a good example because so often we think about academia as sitting in its own separate world that doesn't relate to what we might see in private industry. But I think you can see here that a lot of the things that they cared about are the same as many other industries that we work with. Um, And they did, as Peter said, they did take advantage of that custom 360 option. So, what we offer in this space is a tool that is designed to that organization's bespoke competency model. It's still based on our library of benchmarked items so that they're able to benchmark that overall score against a benchmark, but still gives them that flexibility of measuring the things that they care about the most.
And I
All
think
right.
what this page
So,
shows, Kate, sorry, if you can read the small print
no,
on the
please go
left-hand
ahead.
side, the group average was
Sure.
5.7. And when you look at the benchmarking, 5.7 is exactly where most teams land. So that's okay, healthy, respectable, decent, solid. And courageously, they said the goal ought to be to get to the 75th percentile. So if they're going to repeat the 360, which they said
Mm.
they will, the target will be 5.9. So that's best practice, improving leadership. So we improve the employee experience and the bottom line business outcomes.
And Peter, in terms of how teams set that goal and go after it, how do you coach a team leader in terms of choosing a target that's meaningful for them and getting the team to buy in on it?
Yeah. So, firstly, Kate, we do discuss really the concept of leadership driving engagement and performance, and most people intuitively say that's correct. That's what our experience is. Um, and for a team in this case to be at 5.7, we're saying it's a good result, but we can all do better. And everyone was committed to acting on their own
Mm.
individual 360 plus addressing the group issues. And it was done with a lot of psychological safety, a lot of respect. So people felt comfortable talking about that number. I mean, the funny thing is, Kate, we have numbers everywhere as KPIs, like the number of students we get and the quality of our research evaluated independently, but sometimes we just don't have numbers on leadership and the employee
Hmm.
experience. In this case, they were also doing employee engagement, so we're
Yeah.
able to look at the data there to map the correlations.
Okay. Well, let's go through the structure of the Hogan 360 and we can dive into a little bit more around what came out of this team's data. Just to familiarize everyone with the tool and what we're talking about, we've got the demographic questions up front, which we use for our own research within PBC. Those standard 50 questions that we've mentioned that come back to create that overall score. A group of top four strengths and opportunities to improve. That's what the group nominates as the most important aspects for the colleague at question. And then, of course, we get open-ended comments to get that flexible feedback for what we're not capturing in the structured data. So in the case of this team, I mean, Peter, you've talked a lot about what that scoring looked like and their objective that they set for the next point. What we might look at next is what actually were the trends in that data.
Yeah, Kate, this is where you get amazing information. And given that they're very senior academics, they love the data. They're all over the data, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So, what we do, we had an executive average score on the left, which was an external benchmark. Then we said, this is the team's overall score. Then we introduced what did the individuals say about themselves? That's the self column. Then, very importantly, the Deputy Vice Chancellor was the manager. So we all get to see how she rated the group. Then you've got peers, reports, stakeholders, and others. So there's a lot of power breaking it down. For example, what if your reports were giving low scores? You'd have to say, well, there's something
Mm.
not so good about the leadership or what's the staff turnover. But in this case, what we found is the self scores were quite modest. There was no ego, no narcissism, fairly realistic scores. So the bit of humility here. And we've circled 5.4 for leveraging collaborative relationships. That was the lowest score that the individuals gave themselves. So a suggestion that we're working in silos. We're not the one team, one dream. So I'm the dean of the business school called medicine or engineering, and we do our own thing. We're not really collaborating with each other. And then the peers
Mm.
also scored that one at 5.3. The peers rating each other said we're not the one team, one dream either. So the individuals knew it, the peers all knew it about each other. And in a second, we'll talk about the Deputy Vice Chancellor saying, come on, there is a lot we have in common. Student enrolments, research, rankings, funding and budgets to make sure we've got good facilities. So the Deputy Vice Chancellor was very keen to revisit the strategic plan, the purpose, and bring them together. Developing high performing teams, the peers gave each other a 5-3, saying, we look over the fence and we can see that not everything's perfect. So the goal then came team one needs to be high performing, which is this cohort. And then in turn, the teams they lead, the next step is to make them high performing. So this breakdown of the data was very powerful when you're looking at the aggregated data, which is the
Mm.
point of our conversation today. So the takeaways, self scores were on the low side, no hubris, a very open group. Everyone was very receptive to the coaching sessions. Everyone was invested in the professional development. Some of them said we haven't had anything like this for a number of years. Uh, the peers with a tougher score. So it wasn't that we're all together for the bigger picture. We're in silos. We run our own race. Uh, Direct reports were very good. So we then check for what's the employee engagement scores, and it did correlate very well with getting good engagement. And the manager scored the direct reports very accurately. The deputy vice chancellor really did have a
Mm.
finger on the pulse. Can I say, Kate, that we had wonderful feedback from the Deputy Vice Chancellor
Excellent.
and the HR partner. They thought the whole process was very professional. Everyone got a lot out of the coaching session. So we got a lot of positive feedback.
Good. I'm not surprised to hear it, Peter, but I am glad to. Do you want to talk a little bit around how the strengths and opportunities play into this as well, and how you approached sharing this data with the team and facilitating that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kate. So one unique feature of the 360, which you don't find in other 360s, is two tables called the strengths and the opportunities. And that's been developed by our magnificent research team, where we have half a dozen PhDs and masters people that correlate all this data for us because science underpins everything that we do. So you pick four strengths in an individual, and this is obviously the correlated data for the whole cohort, and we allocate 4 votes to a person's first choice, 3, 2, 1. So if I'm rating someone, Kate, I'm actually allocating 10 votes, 4, 3, 2, 1, which explains the total score on the right. So 148 votes on the right was the highest accumulated score. It was for high ethical standards and integrity. And our benchmark ranking, that's normally ninth. So they just love understanding a point of difference. Oh, we're number one for this, and other groups are number nine. Number two was
Mm,
very impressive. They've got strong leadership skills. So we love that item. If you've got strong leadership skills, drive the purpose, the strategy, the vision, and the employee experience to get all those bottom line outcomes that we need. Three, they're hardworking, but so is everybody else. Four, they're competent. That's normally number one. And five, they've got a positive attitude, which could be infectious if you're trying to motivate and engage your people. And they're pretty good at relationships. So why don't we use that one to enhance peer relationships? So
very
this
nice.
slide was where we talked about how do we leverage our strengths as a group.
Mm. And then on the other side, I think we also looked at what were their opportunities to improve.
Yep, absolutely. And the reason we've highlighted these, Kate, is one, two, and three were actually one, two, three in the benchmark. Stop taking on too
Mm,
much and spreading yourself thin. Unfortunately, we sort of work hard when we're in our late 20s and early 30s to prove ourselves, and then we're still doing it when we're in our 40s and 50s. Two, we're not delegating enough. And three, we're not challenging poor performance. So they're the big three universal challenges. So we combined one and two and called it more effective workload management. We've all got to
mm,
have a look at our workload, the balance between working in the business and on the business, the balance between being operational and strategic. Where do I add the most value? What do I say no? How do I push back? And delegation should be seen as not throwing your people under a bus, but empowering your people, coaching your people, and getting these very senior people to transition to being a coach. Challenge poor performance. It's the old Jim Collins in Good to Great. Get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. And
mm,
that was a very, very interesting conversation for the group. Who are the poor performers? Do we discuss it at our quarterly retreats? What's the approach in a university environment for sometimes having these difficult conversations? Number four was really interesting because it's normally number seven. Be more strategic and visionary. So that's where we said we'll take the opportunity to revisit the 3 year strategic plan, the 1 year plan, and the purpose. Because, Kate, I don't know about you, but driving a purpose statement in a university, oh my God, I'd love to be involved in that. What are we here for? You know, the education of students and building careers, world-class research, and being the font of all wisdom. So the Deputy Vice Chancellor was all over that like a rash, saying, yep, let's drive that collective vision. Communicate better. They're not sharing information with each other and building stronger relationships, particularly at the peer level. So very good data from the collective 360 results to inform the conversations we were having.
mm. And I think, Peter, when we talk about outcomes, the quality of that data showed up in how that was received by the team itself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Kate. So the outcome was everyone had a development plan. What are the three or four goals I'm going to work on? It was integrated with HR, so we could actually put it into the performance management system. So it's part of your ongoing review. Uh, and number two, every participant had a really good session with the Deputy Vice Chancellor to share their 360 and get more coaching. When we had the team event, each participant openly shared their top four strengths and opportunities within the team. And that requires that psychological safety and trust. I'm going to be open and vulnerable. But once you get that process going, Kate, of being open, it makes ongoing open conversations and difficult conversations easier. Number four, the Deputy Vice Chancellor was going to look at the strategic planning cycle. How do we tackle the purpose and vision to excite and motivate the leaders and their reports and get that one team approach? And we were thrilled that they signed off on a second 360 in 12 months. So once you tell people up front there's going to be a repeat 360, there's a little bit more pressure to do your development plan and focus on the goal of becoming self-master.
Yeah, I think people respond really well to that accountability mechanism. So often they're used to development activities or something where we do it, we stick in our desk drawer, we don't talk about it again. And having that continuity is a really important theme. Uh, it's actually, and there's a lot of evidence to show that repeating 360s drives better outcomes. One of the most famous studies on this is by Frank Shipper, who investigated for managers who went through multiple 360s, how did that correlate to external ratings of effectiveness? So looking at how they were rated on different measures of effectiveness by their colleagues, as well as actual business results. And you can see here there's a pretty linear relationship between the more often we're going through an exercise like this, the better results we tend to see in how people's leadership is perceived, which goes back exactly to what you said at the start around brand being key to career success. Um, okay. Well, I know there's a lot to talk about too that I'm sure the audience is wondering about in terms of, how do you approach this with the team? How do you get them on board? We do have time later on to talk through the practitioner side, but I want to keep moving with some examples that bring to life other ways where you can use 360s. So Peter mentioned earlier that we prefer to work with the three best tools, which are Personality 360 and Teams. This is a great example of a major pharmaceutical company who did just that with their executive team. So this is a European organization that does over 45 billion in revenue annually, 48,000 employees globally, huge global footprint, but very purpose-driven organization. And they balance that orientation towards purpose with a very strong focus on their financial results and employee engagement. So you can see right away, philosophically, we were very aligned in terms of our company and this client. The challenge for this unique client was that they were going through a period of massive growth, and their executive team had worked together for years, but realized that what had gotten them there was not going to get them to the next horizon that they needed. And so they approached us to say, how can we still maintain the best parts of our culture, but stop being managers and start being leaders and really set us up for operational scale and growth? Peter, you were the lead consultant on this. Is there anything that you'd like to add to give the audience a flavor for what this team was like?
Kate, the critical issue was getting the support 5, 6 years ago from the CEO and the executive team. They all bought
Mm,
into it. And that's
hmm.
so important that that senior leadership group give 110% support to the process. They've got to buy in, they've got to be role models.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we talk about buying in, really what it was that the managing director sponsored us to do a very holistic coaching approach with this team. So for those of you familiar with the Hogan personality assessments, it was the leadership forecast series. Of course, we use the Hogan 360. We had 3 coaching sessions per executive, but we also had quarterly team offsites where we were going through that data from Personality 360 and the team, as you'll see. So not only was the MD investing in every member of the executive is getting a very in-depth view into their leadership, but also he was really sponsoring that we are going to come together as a team and look at what this results mean and how it's affecting how we operate the business. So this really underpins our core philosophy, which is that core personality is half the battle. Now, you have to understand that deeper part of yourself to really understand why a leader shows up. But at the end of the day, personality is not fate. We're all autonomous beings. So we also want to look at what are the behavior choices that that individual is making on a day-to-day basis. And ultimately, together, we think that those give you that most complete view of how others see us, some of that self-awareness that Peter was speaking about earlier. And so this approach is really reflective of that integrated view of looking closely at personality as well as how it relates to our behavioral choices. Now, Peter has done a separate webinar on that topic, and we could do many more. So we're not going to spend too much time on it today. But again, we can share more resources if this is something that you're looking to incorporate more with how you coach and work with your leaders. Bottom line for us is that the best leaders are the best learners. So they're able to continually be taking on that feedback and continuing to improve based on it. Would you add anything to this, Peter?
No, look, I think it's a great slide. Look, core personality, we all are hardwired to a certain degree. Behavior choices is really, well, who do you want to be? What's the best version of yourself? What's the 360 telling you that you need to work on? What's the team assessment or the employee engagement data? And that's where we've got to help executives make the correct behavior choices, support them, hold them accountable. And ultimately, that's your reputation. That's how others see you, which is best measured by a repeat 360.
Absolutely. And repeat 360s they did. So, so we've combined the 360 and the HPTA as kind of that what were we observing? And we use personality to understand those underlying behavioral preferences and personality tendencies. And that together leads to a really much more integrated coaching experience, like what Peter's referring to. You really get to a deeper level with those individuals. But the results of that we actually saw at the team level because this team went through a huge amount of transition during their time. Oh, sorry, I forgot. We've already given this quote, Peter. Combining 360 data with personality, we compare public with the private person to build strategic self-awareness and career success. We love
And
it.
that comes from Dr. Hogan himself. So it's a beautiful
Well
quote.
done. Well done, Peter. Okay. So I mentioned this team went through an immense amount of transition. So when we began working with the team in 2022, they were just getting a new managing director coming in. And the outgoing managing director actually used their 360 to negotiate what their next role looked like within the country, or within the company, rather. As we continued to work with the team, we saw that the executive team was keen to sponsor an expansion, and they wanted to cascade the approach that they were working through down to the next management level and spread that. In parallel with this happening, the MD's existing rotation ended, and we had a new managing director come in. And so that was an interesting inflection point because that managing director chose to maintain that rigor of quarterly planning, assessment review, ensuring individual and team coaching, which brought a lot of continuity into that transition. So we started to see the impact of these couple of years of consistent approach to leadership development at the executive level. When in 2025, a lot of new competitors and entrants entered their market. And that team very much credited the foundational work they'd done in investing and working together as what helped them navigate the changes to their industry. Now, coming into 2026, we're preparing for the third transition, the third new managing director. And again, using that data to help the MD assess team performance. And we'll show you a little bit of this type of snapshot that we give new incoming leaders to help them understand the team. Peter, anything that you would want to add from sitting in the driver's seat across this transition period?
Um, yeah, just for the benefit of the audience, Kate, the reason we had three MDs, head office is Europe, and they like to rotate senior executives globally on a regular basis. So that was part of the challenge. Would each MD want to come in and use different assessments or a different approach, or could they see the value of partnering with PBC?
So far, so good. So I want to spend a little more time talking about the HPTA so that when we're talking about some of the results that the audience understands what we're talking about. So I mentioned earlier that the HPTA measures the team in terms of performance and culture, and it measures the team as its own separate entity. So we're not necessarily aggregating the scores from each of the individuals. We're asking each individual to assess the team's performance. The assessment has 60 rate on scale benchmark questions, and those are broken down into those 12 sub-themes across performance and culture. Now, really important for executive audiences, it's a short survey. It takes usually no more than 15 minutes to complete. So we're still getting that thorough picture of quantitative data, but we're really making good use of people's time with that. And of course, because we're PBC, we always benchmark. So we offer different benchmarking levels dependent on the team level and type of team. So we're comparing executives to executives and maybe agile working groups to themselves, for example. Peter, anything you want to add to talk about your brainchild?
Well, just you'll see the results in a moment. The
Hmm.
magnificent thing that this company did was use the high performing team assessment every 12 months, which is really putting
Exactly.
pressure on the executives. How do we feel we're going and how do we feel about each other?
Hmm.
So you'll see here in 2022, 7.7 out of 10, which is quite a good score. They dipped. There were a few internal challenges that needed to be dealt with. Then they picked up again 7.8. And last year, I had to go to a conference at Surrey Hills, beautiful Surrey Hills in Sydney, and walk in and say, hey, you're 8.2, which I think, Kate, was in the top 10 percentile of team scores that we've got. So they were really proud, and I think they went out and had a drink that night.
I would hope so. Um, and to our point earlier, this is a very purpose-driven executive team, purpose-driven organization, but at the end of the day, they're all there for the bottom line results. So seeing that engagement scores were also continuing to uptick during this period of tremendous expansion and stress was rewarding, and that their financial performance remains strong despite the new entrants and disruption into the market. They feel that they're resilient and continuing to do well in the face of those things. And so now let's talk about Peter for the new MD who's coming in. Can you talk to them about the type of data that we're going to be giving to help understand the team that they're inheriting?
Yeah, Kate. The new MD started about 8 weeks ago and said, I've been briefed by HR that we love working with you and you've got plenty of data. Could you come and talk to me? So I hit the ground running. And I said, well, in the most recent team assessment, these were the challenges for the team. Number one, improved communications, got 25 votes, again, using that 4-3-2-1 when you identify first, second, third, fourth choices. Then process improvement, tackle the difficult issues and more collaboration. So in his first 90 days, he was going to talk through these four issues with his direct reports. You've told us in the last survey you want better communications. Where's the blockage? Process improvements. What are the critical processes? Does it involve technology? And what are the difficult issues we're not dealing with? So, Kate, the big win was he was over the moon at having this data almost in week one to understand
Mm.
what he needed to do with his team rather than spending the first 6 months sussing it all out.
Yeah, it's pretty much a an ordered list of where he needs to
Yep,
spend his time in
yep,
leadership. Mm.
yep.
Okay, fabulous. Well, so we've talked a lot about what happened with the executive team, but of course, oh, sorry. We this was from the perspective of the head of HR in terms of what that impact was, which I think really puts nicely from their perspective what she saw. The business sees them both as individuals, but also as a team, as leaders of the business. So it's important for them to be able to look at both sides. So balancing that team and individual perspective and being able to see that aggregate data, both from their 360, but also from the team assessments themselves, help us build feedback for them as a team. So, when we're talking about the impact and feedback for them as a team, the next challenge for this organization was that they didn't want to keep it just at the executive level. They realized that to navigate this transition, that they were going to need to work more broadly across the organization. And so, moving into the next level down, we're going to actually revisit the same company, but look at it from a different lens. So in this case, the executive team said it's important for us that we're increasing our bench strength across the board. As we as executives move up and start to handle more strategic issues and operate less as managers, we need to know that our direct reports are ready to step up and truly act as leaders as well. And so as a result, what we did is really look to how can we cascade that approach to the next level down of managers. Now, Peter, you talk a lot about this cascading and building that visionary leadership bridge. Can you explain more about your perspective on this issue?
Yeah, just very briefly, Kate. I call the executive team, the most senior team we deal with, as Team One. And the direct reports to the CEO in that team also have their own teams, which I call Team Two. So all the research shows it's not until you get a critical mass of managers at Team One and Team Two, it could be 50 or 60, that you can drive the strategy, the purpose, the KPIs, and the employee experience. So best practice, Kate, is we invest in Teams Two to really bring them into line. And what we found recently in some Gallup research is 44% of managers said they've never had adequate training. So we can
Mm.
actually then use the personality, the 360, and the team diagnostics to really give them that help in transitioning from manager to leader. So I'd
Mm.
ask the audience to think about what are you doing at Team One, and is there a need to do something at Teams Two?
And correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, but I think you see the most success from this approach when Team One is really invested in role modeling and setting the example for those teams too.
Absolutely. So again, Kate, it's leadership getting results through teams and realizing that teams too matter. And we've also seen some research that leadership vision at team one breaks down if teams two aren't aligned. So that's
Mhm.
just a catastrophe when team one's got the vision, but that they haven't got buy-in from teams two. And the
Yeah.
experience it has on the workforce is confusion. Who are we? Where are we going? Is there a plan? Does anybody know what we're doing?
Mm. And I think in this organization's case, we'll actually get to look into the data to see what was the experience for the managers themselves. So in terms of how we worked with the managers, we used the Insight series for those of you familiar with the Hogans, the Hogan 360, two coaching sessions, and we also engage with those individuals through leadership program engagement. Now, One of the things we did as part of that leadership program engagement was actually put up data from the 360s and have a very open discussion about it. So you can see that the managers did fairly well. They were scored squarely on the 75th percentile, which is very respectable, especially for a group of this size. But when we looked at their top strengths and opportunities, so remembering what Peter brought back in terms of we're nominating 4, 3, 2, 1, assigning value for the points that are greatest strengths. Um, what's really interesting when we start to look at this group is where we see the parallels and differences from the executive team as we're looking at, again, getting that leadership bench strength ready. So you can see here for this group, top opportunity or top strengths rather, solid technical ability, positive attitude, professional approach, ethical standards, effective relationships. And when we compare that to their bosses, incredibly similar, right? So we have a shared technical ability found as a foundation, which we would hope for pharmaceutical executives. Positive attitude across the board, although that drops down a little bit for your executives. High ethical standards. So when we take that away, what we really start to see are what are the unique strengths for those relative leadership levels, and how can we have an open conversation about that? So as we'd expect, our managers are showing up very effectively as managers. They have a professional approach, they're effective at building relationships. But what the executive team really does differently is those leadership skills, that driven, determined, results-oriented attitude. And we can do the same thing when we look at opportunities to improve. So for our managers, we see that they take on too much, spread themselves too thin, delegate more. We'd like them to be more assertive and confident, more strategic and visionary, and as always, challenge poor performance. With the executive team, again, we see a lot of parallels. So we see everybody, as Peter mentioned earlier, struggles with taking on too much. Everybody could delegate more, and everybody could challenge poor performance. But when we take these things away, again, what we see is that if we're looking at how do we develop our managers more specifically, there's a need for that assertiveness, that visionary element that the executive team is probably doing, but they're not necessarily receiving. And on the same token, the executives are working on time management, providing more feedback and development opportunities to bring that next layer up. So you can see how if you can have a really open conversation around these themes, it helps not just understand any one team in isolation, but also understand how the two are working together. Peter, is there anything I missed from that that you think is important
No,
for the
it's
people
very
to
good, Kate.
understand?
I think for the audience, it's the transition on the left from manager to on the right, the leader. And John Cotter's famous from Harvard Business School. The manager is running the trains on time. The leader is creating the future of transport. Uh, so in our research, Kate, you need to be capable, emotionally intelligent, and achievement focused at any level. But when you get into an executive level, you've got to be inspiring and motivational. And you can see
Hmm.
here that's where the transition is from the left to the right, uh, uh, particularly on that previous slide.
Absolutely. All right. So in terms of impact, Peter mentioned that this all started a few years ago. So we're now in the fifth year of running this program with the senior managers in the business. Teams are seen as and developed as teams in their own entities, not just individuals. We have clear understanding of strengths and opportunities at the team level, which we use to develop those leaders. There's a more of a feedback culture with robust quality feedback. And as we talked about, the executive teams are role modeling. What does high performance look like across the board for the organization? And of course, we've got a quote from our very supportive HR leader. I think our business has been really successful over the last 5 years, and a lot of that is to do with our leaders and the improvement in engagement and development that they've done. It was important for us to grow our leaders, all of our leaders, but particularly our executive team at the same pace as the business, and PBC really helped with that. I think we see that growth from the scores. Um, so now with a few minutes left, I think we better give the people some actionable tools to take home, don't you, Peter?
Yes, absolutely. Spot on.
Okay, so let's talk about the number one concern I hear from clients is how do I make this work for teams? On paper, this sounds great. The insight is useful, but I think people are going to get scared. So let's go through your top tips for making it work.
Thank you, Kate. We often see that a critical starting point is support from the CEO and the HR or people and culture director. So you've got to have really good sponsorship. And the psychological safety is paramount. There's got to be trust in an organization. Because years ago, 360s were sometimes used for political reasons, not professional development reasons. Um, we want the CEO to be a role model, like sharing their 360 data and encouraging the process of everybody else sharing. We want to see a development plan, so it's not a talk fest. So you leverage your strengths and opportunities. We do encourage the sharing and the peer networking, and we want to capture the development plans. Sometimes we use the keep, stop, start once you've got that data. And it really helps if there's a 360 repeat 12 months on. So we know it's not fad surfing, it's a way of life. We're taking it very seriously. So we often have these conversations up front, Kate, to get maximum buy-in and trust for the process.
And I think that expectation setting up front is really important with 360s, especially to your point that sometimes people come in with the expectation a 360 is going to be used for political reasons. If they're not aware that we're going to be using this as a team, they can feel a bit like the rug was pulled out from under them. So having the leader set the expectation up front, we will be talking about these things as a team. It is okay. We don't expect everyone to be perfect, is really important to getting that buy-in and trust throughout the process. All right, Peter. So if we had to summarize what we've talked about today, how would you say it?
Well, I would say it's the concept we started with, Kate. Leadership drives engagement and engagement drives performance. An individual leader has 50% of the impact on their team and the workforce. So Dr. Hogan says leadership is really consequential, and we desperately need good leaders of business, countries, everywhere you look, you're looking at what are the leaders. And self-awareness towards self-mastery is the journey. Uh, I still see too many managers getting their 360 and saying, so what, now what? And
Mm,
wanting to park it in the bottom drawer and go back to being, an operational manager. So leadership is a resource, and we've got to judge the effectiveness of leadership by their team and their outcomes. And Kate, I think the use of analytics, which we've covered today, what's the causal link between the leaders 360, their team's experience, and their KPI outputs. So that really
mhm.
helps show bring some science to support the use of it.
Absolutely.
And when we do it well, Kate, which I think we do it well all the time, it's a very powerful experience for those on the receiving end. We've had some
Mm.
wonderful testimonials about how useful and good and effective and powerful it is.
That's what we do it for, huh, Peter? All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining. That concludes what Peter and I have prepared. But now, of course, we have a few minutes to answer questions that you've been putting through in the chat. Um, So let's see. I think, Peter, one common question that I hear a lot is how do you actually coach the team leader to help set that expectation, particularly maybe when you don't have those leaders who are really embracing the approach naturally? What's your best advice for helping team leaders understand their role in role modeling?
I think we start with the concept, Kate, that your team is your brand. And what sort of a team do you want? Do you want a highly effective team or a dysfunctional team?
Mm,
So we try to get to see the team leader as saying, this is a chance for me to invest in my team. I can really take
yeah.
my team from good to great. And what we do, Kate, is we try to get strategic clarity and employee experience measures to align the activity so it's tied to real business outcomes.
Mm, absolutely. And related to that, Peter, when we talk about the manager's feedback not being anonymous and their responsibility as part of that, how do you, I guess, guide the manager in terms of their responsibility in owning that feedback?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kate. Years ago, we decided we would have the manager feedback as a standalone column, so they can actually see exactly how they got scored by their manager, whereas the rest are clustered in bunches. There's a group of peers, there's a group of direct reports, etc. Best practice that we identified a couple of years ago in a mature organization, you can't hide the manager feedback. They want to know
Mm,
what the manager has said. So we do explicitly say up front to the CEO or the GM and HR, just be aware the manager column will be a standalone column and that person will get to see that feedback. And Kate, it's the same with the written feedback at the back of the report. Tell us about the strengths, tell us about the opportunities, tell us about opportunities overused. The manager is identified there as well. Now, I would say that 90% of the time that's done very professionally by a manager. Occasionally, they will say something that should have been said before face to face
Mm,
to the person, and they've sort of waited for the 360 to come up, which is not always great. But we then say to the recipient, the next step is a one-on-one with your boss. You've got some questions to have with your boss to get
mm.
closure.
And do you always recommend that we have one-on-ones with the boss to go through 360 results?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. In fact,
Mm,
Kate, one of the things we're doing now is we have a couple of coaching sessions with the individual, and best practice for me is we then have a coaching session with the individual and their manager. So it's a three-way session, and this
mm.
that enriches the whole conversation enormously, and is of great power to the manager of the manager to be participating in that dialogue.
And sets us up for hopefully another team session down the track, right? Yeah. Well, Peter, the time has flown by, but we have used all of it. So for those of you who have joined us for this time, if you would like any help with getting started, we've gone through a lot of concepts today. There's a lot of tools at your disposal. So you're always welcome to book in a consultation with our team to talk about for your unique team, what's going to be the best approach for you? How can we help guide you, not just on the tool, but all of the approach around it? So that QR code will set you up with a consultation with us. But otherwise, thank you so much for all of you who've joined us today for being engaged and attentive as an audience. And I wish you all the best in engaging with your teams and getting them to keep investing in their teamwork. Peter, final words from you?
No, great session, Kate. And can I just say, 360s are not going away, but you've got to get the
Mm,
right one with the validity, the science, the benchmarks, and we love to work with our clients on building better culture, better employee engagement, and of course, sustainable bottom line results. So thank you, everybody. Don't be a stranger. Come and talk to us.
we'd love that. And there you go. There's our email if you do. You can send us an email right now with your thoughts if you